Go together. Here it is. So, connecting the alphabet, the alphabetic script to Hebrew. How do we do this? I want to show you how this all works, as if we were doing it in English. Let's say, for example, that we want to create an alphabetic script like the Hebrews, Ephraim and Manasseh, created the Hebrew alphabet. How do we do it? How does it look? How does it work? So here is a way of helping you see this. Let's say that with my first or second grade level of drawing, I can draw a boat. You see this, hopefully you know what it means. And you say what word to yourself in your mind? Boat. And instead of saying boat out loud, you pronounce the consonant that starts the word, just the B sound. Now, the bad news is Hebrew, as it was originally composed, and even as it's spoken and written today by Jewish people, they do not typically with adults. With kids, it's different. They give them vowels, vowel pointings, but with the adults, they don't write with vowels at all. And in the beginning, that's how it was, believe it or not. The Greek alphabet includes vowels. It's an alphabetic script that has vowels in it. Hebrew doesn't, so it makes it more complicated. You have to know and thus insert the vowels as you read the whole word and you see the consonants of it. You figure out what the whole word is, and then you insert those right vowels. So, like it or not, that's how they did it. So we're going to do it the same. We're going to create an English script using their method. So that makes the B sound. There it is. And now I draw this, and this makes the what sound? D sound. Good. And this makes another B sound, and this makes the G sound. So we've got B, D, B, G. Now, we don't know exactly from just that how many words are there or what it's saying. But we can figure out possibilities. The B and the D can be bid as if you bid in an auction. It could be bad as if you're a bad student. It can be a bud as in a flower bud, or lots of other options, right? You could even write or consider that it's bode. That doesn't bode well for me, B-O-D-E. So context is the only thing that's going to help you figure out which one is right. That being the case, it could be that all of this is one word, but that's not what I as the writer am intending. Instead, I want to give it these consonants, but I'm going to break it into two words, and we'll do it as the Hebrews did, a noun first and an adjective second. So I'm suggesting that this is a word that's a noun. Can anybody think of a word that's a noun that could go with an adjective that could work with these?
A bed that's big.
Yes, exactly. A bed that's big. Except in English, we're going to transpose. Big bed. It's an attributive adjectival use. A big bed. That's what we've just written. A big bed. And that's how I would translate it if this were Hebrew. Imagine my task if I have deciphered and figured out all the right letters and the sounds they make, and now I come to an inscription, and it's just, and this is the way they do it. No vowels and no breaks between words. Can you imagine how much fun that is to figure out an inscription? Yeah, sounds great. Let's all do it. And that's why it took me hours and hours and hours and hours to figure all of that out. And so the task is made more difficult. So it's two words, and it says big bed, according to the intention I have as I write it. But again, there are possibilities because of the lack of written vowels, and that makes it very challenging. All right, so just a quick word on the process that I went through in deciphering the script. I mean, how many times do you have the opportunity in life to actually decipher, to be the human being who deciphers an entire script? Not many. And it's pretty humbling, and it's pretty daunting. But once I knew it's Hebrew, I caught up on that 150 years of scholarship. Then I went back to the alphabet, the original Hebrew alphabet, and I said to myself, I've got to make sure I've got the right picture, right, the right pictograph, a letter in the form of a picture, for every Hebrew letter that's in the alphabet. And so I collected inscriptions, all kinds of inscriptions, looked at, and made for myself, redrew all those letters that they had. And I tried to figure out which is, and I went through the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, etc., all the way to the Tau at the end, and tried to figure out which consonantal values go with which pictographs. And because I was caught up on 150 years of scholarship, I knew what was the conventional thought and where scholars disagreed with one another on which is the right consonant. So what I did then is I put every letter on trial, one at a time. And I said, let's say I saw a picture of what looked like a door, right? So what I would do is I would say, is that correct? And actually the Hebrew word for door is dalet. So it does make the d sound. So I would go to a Hebrew lexicon, which is a dictionary, and I'd go to the D letter, the dalet letter, and I would look through exhaustively every single Hebrew word that starts with a D, with a dalet, one at a time. And I would read the word, and then I would look at the examples that I gave, and I would read the next word, look at the examples, read the next word, look at the examples. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm making a list of possibilities for an actual word that could be connected to that hieroglyph, or that what was originally a hieroglyph that turned into an alphabetic letter, a pictographic letter. So I would, from going through that entire list of words, every vocabulary word with that letter, that Hebrew letter, I would then have a master list, and with that master list I made, then I worked from that list, and let's say there are 8 of them, and I would look at all the words again, one at a time against the pictographs, and I would start crossing out possibilities, process of elimination. So I made it as scientific as possible to try to pare it down to one picture that works best, if not exclusively, to define or to connect that pictographic letter with that sound. And I did this with every single letter in the Hebrew alphabet. So imagine how much time that took. And I was able, after enough time, and I stretched it out, right? There are times I would just rest from it, take a day off, and go back and get a fresh look, and take a week off and travel somewhere and come back and work with it. So it was a long process, but I came to where I was completely convinced I've got the right phonetic value with each one of the pictographs that represents a letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Some of them are equal to what we know today with our Hebrew alphabet, that as we say it, recite it, it fits, right? But some of them were different. And in 1 or 2 cases, I suggested, I forget what that exact number is, 1 or 2 cases, where I varied from any other scholar in history in trying to identify that letter correctly. But I had reason for it, because I went through a scientific process, and I knew which language was behind the script. So that helped me formulate a confident alphabet. And with that confident alphabet, I went back. Then I created this chart and first. And then, so I connected an alphabetic letter. Let's say, let's start with this. So I'm suggesting that so this is, we know it as the G letter. It's Gimel in Hebrew, as it's pronounced today. The letter Gimel, the G sound. I'm suggesting that the original Hebrew writing of it was about like this, after a hieroglyph. And this is the hieroglyph after which it was formulated. So what does this mean, right? What does this mean? And here, this will show you the process of my trying to figure this out. So there are inscriptions from Joseph's lifetime, from 1842 to actually beyond his lifetime, 1760, in this column. So these are Middle Kingdom representations of the letters as they're attested. This is Moses' lifetime, Dynasty 18, so Dynasty 12 mostly, a little bit maybe into 13, but mostly 12, 18. And then all of these are from later, from 1150 and following, all the way down to the Babylonian captivity that begins in 587 BC. And so let's say we're focusing on this letter, and I'm suggesting it's based on this hieroglyph, so this column is hieroglyphs. This column is as you would read the word itself, and so I'm suggesting Geher is the word. But how did I get Geher, and what does it mean? If I look at the inscriptions from Joseph's lifetime, I see that's what kind of angle? Somebody?
Right angle?
Acute. It's acute because it's less than 90 degrees. This is what kind of angle?
Obtuse.
Obtuse, because it's greater than 90 degrees. This is what? Acute. Obtuse. Right. So we've got all three kinds of angles here. What are we talking about? What's behind this word? Well, if you look at the Hebrew verb, gaher, it means bend. So let's say you have some flexible metal, kind of like Mrs. Incredible. She wants her husband to be more flexible. So you have metal that can flex. You can make an angle acute, you can make it right, or you can make it obtuse. Your choice. But in every one of those cases, it's going to be an angle, isn't it? It's going to have a bend to it. So I deduced that that letter originally is based on the Hebrew verb to bend. And there it is. There's the connection. It means bend. Gaher. You see a bend? Two strokes. 1, 2, and that's it. You see a bend with 2 strokes? It's the G sound. And so that's how it works. And then there's another letter I'll show you. The progression over time. And then we'll move on to more exciting things. Remember our old friend, this guy? Touchdown hieroglyph? So there's one inscription where Manasseh writes, and he draws it like this. It's kind of like a guy on skis, if you can see. Big feet. And that's how he draws it. So I just used his, because he's one of the inventors of the alphabet, so I just went with his Egyptian hieroglyph as this is how he originally wrote it. And again, remember, these guys aren't trained scribes, but they know the language. They're not as careful and as talented as the Egyptian scribes. So it's a little bit more of a, I don't know if hack job's the right word, but it's not quite the same as a scribe would do it. So that letter. And here it's attested on Wadi El-Hol 1, which we'll look at briefly. And then also on Wadi El-Hol 1 is this. This is the same letter. Now, there's something really strange that goes on, though. This one is as we'd expect it, right? It's like the hieroglyph. It's like he writes the hieroglyphic letter himself. That's normal, but this one is different. This is taking one raised and taking the other and having it down, as it is on the seated man hieroglyph to show that that's a human being. I don't know what you want to call it. It's a variant. It's less pictographically faithful to the hieroglyph, but at the end of the day, here's the deal, folks. He gets to do whatever he wants when he writes the letter. It doesn't have to look the same every time, but it's always based on that hieroglyph. So that, and notice, we're not worried so much about the legs because the real important part of the picture is the part that's above the chest, isn't it? It's the arms raised toward the heavens, toward deity. That's really what's going on here. So the legs, let's just draw some squigglies, and we're done. Squigglies, and we're done. Same here. You know, upper leg, knee, lower leg, I don't know, foot. So there's really not too much effort that goes into the writing of that letter. But remember I told you that there's this principle that over time it's going to become less and less pictographic. Notice in Moses' lifetime, that same letter, look, there's the 2 arms, the upward pointing 2 arms just like here, right? And there's the quick squiggly. Same here, it's written here. But notice the big head, if you will, goes to a small head. We don't need to worry so much about the head. It's not part of the equation. So it's just a little dot. And then There's one inscription in Moses' era that does this. The legs are so important, we don't even need them. So we cut out the legs. All we have is a little bit of the torso here, arm, upper arm, lower arms, and neck and head. And then this just dips down, but that's nothing. Then, over the centuries, this turns to this. It doesn't need, the Hebrew writers didn't worry about what's called pitch, which is the positioning, right? Like this. We never write a capital A like this, do we?
No.
No, that's 180 degrees off. Pitch matters for us. Pitch didn't matter for them. They can write it with any angle they want. Doesn't affect anything. So what can become flexible now that this is way more abstract than this. Now we can just forget about that torso part and we can just turn this 90 degrees and it looks like a capital E, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. On the Esbet Sarta Ostracan. But that is the same thing as that. It's the same letter. It's just progressed over time, becoming less and less pictographic, more and more abstract. And the more abstract it is, believe it or not, the easier it is to write.
Yeah.
So that's the process that takes place. All right, does that make sense?
Yep.
You good with that?
Yep.
All right, so here are all the letters in the Hebrew alphabet as we read the alphabet today. And then, again, all of the important categories. And so this chart, I worked on this chart ad infinitum and always improved it. And electronically drew every letter right over top of as it was inscribed on an inscription, so that I'm giving you exactly what they did. It's not me. It's not looking at it here and writing here, right? It's writing right on top of it electronically, and then repairing it with what's called edit points, if you haven't used that before. It's a great feature in PowerPoint. You can exactly manipulate, and you can zoom in 400%. So PowerPoint is a great tool to transcribe an inscription. It's fantastic. All right, so that's the alphabet, and then here are the last letters of the alphabet down to the tau. Remember I said it looks like a plus sign? So all of those. There are a couple places where we have competing letters. Let's see, is there one or two? Two. So competing letter here, right? This is the chet, this is the guttural letter. This is a courtyard. Remember I told you that the courtyard in Hebrew is chatzer. Chatzer starts with the guttural ch consonant, and so when we write this, that's exactly what it is. And then we have this this hoot, which is a twisted rope, based on that hieroglyph. And so the courtyard is, or enclosure is attested in the 12th dynasty, and then the other option, that twisted rope, is attested here also in the 12th dynasty. They're both attested here in Moses' lifetime in the 18th dynasty, this and then these two. But by the time we get into the period of the judges and down into the monarchy, we have only one attested anymore. This option goes by the wayside. Why? It's much easier to draw the courtyard than the artistic threading that's involved in the other. So it's a natural competition, kind of like, what's Darwin's phrase? Survival of the fittest, right? The fittest, the easiest, is the courtyard. So the other option dies over time. So there are two times when this happened. And of course, my scholars who disagree with me, my adversaries, I don't know, they look at my work and they say, no, this is an extra, these are two extra letters. But if you know that the Hebrew alphabet only had 22 letters, you know that that's not probably what's going on. What's going on instead is you had competing letters and one would win out over time. And if you space this out and look at it over time, you can see that that's exactly what took place. And so the survival happens for the better of the two. So this chart, by the way, is downloadable for free from my academia.edu webpage. You can at any point do it. And I say this in my first book. I say, listen, if you know a little bit of Hebrew, like first year Hebrew, or even less than a full year maybe, and you have a Hebrew dictionary in front of you, and you have this chart right here, I don't care if you're 10 years old, you have the possibility of yourself deciphering an ancient Hebrew inscription. If a new one comes along, right? You can do it. Okay, I don't have to be the one who does this. You can do it. You can take my chart, study Hebrew, have a dictionary, and you're on your way. And you can do this too. Isn't that great? Yeah. Let's teach it to kids, you know? And I've taught this to kids before. They take it better than we do. It's good to be young. All right, so that's my alphabetic chart. And then here's the book, the 2016 book, that went out of print just as COVID came in March of 2020. Right after my publisher had promised me, I'd been working on them since it was out of print for a second edition. They had just agreed to the second edition. Then COVID hit, and because it's an Israeli, look at that, Carta is in Jerusalem. It's an Israeli publisher, a secular Israeli publisher, which I was jumping up and down about because this is for the Jewish people more than anybody. Mm-hmm. Here's your original alphabet, folks. Yeah. Take it and run with it. Yeah. That was the heart. But COVID hit, and because they sell most of their books to tourists in Israel who come and visit, guess what happened to tourism in March of 2020? Ended completely, immediately. So they had to renege on their promise to republish my book. And then over time, I still worked with them and put bugs in their ears. And finally, they agreed to reprint it if I do it quickly. And I have to be the one to raise the funds to do the printing. Because they had almost been taken under because of COVID. They were financially, they probably let go of most of their staff. That's how hard they were hit by the virus. So, and of course for me, the bottom line is getting the book into more people's hands, right? So I said, okay, I'll do it. So I did a crowdfunding campaign, and God raised the funds for the second printing of the first book and the first printing of the second book, all in one fell swoop. It was awesome to see the funds come in. So, that's the book. So with each individual inscription, I talk about several things. So let's see, there's background matters in the book. There are inscriptions from the Middle Kingdom, inscriptions from the New Kingdom. So Joseph's lifetime is Middle Kingdom, Moses' lifetime, New Kingdom. And then concluding thoughts and appendices. So that's what's in the book. And then with each individual of the 15 inscriptions, I give these 4 elements. Background to the inscription, paleographic decipherment, which letter do I, what do I assign as the letter behind every pictograph and the words that it forms. Then translation and orthography, so the translation of each, as I break it down into words, and the spelling that's involved, and its potential historical value. Mainly, not always, but mainly, how does it connect with biblical history? Because that's the bottom line for me. I want to know, how does it relate to biblical history? And many of them do relate to biblical history, so there's a lot to write. And of course, that's the section where people are going to benefit from the most. I tried to strike a balance between scholarly acceptable so that it couldn't be refuted and readable to the average non-specialist. And, lots of luck with that, right? So, probably at some points you'd say it's too technical. Probably at some points, technical people would say it's too user-friendly, right? But I tried. So you can be the judge of whether I succeed. So the second printing came out in December of last year, 2021. And as far as I know, Carta still has it. I bought 100 copies from them and resell them, and I'm down to a half a box. So if anyone's interested, let me know. They don't give me a great discount, and they sell it at a high price. They sell theirs for $84. I sell mine for $60. So I have, again, half a box left if you're interested in a copy. Barry, I think, has reserved at least 2 of them, so they belong to him, and I'll send those to him. But if you're interested, let me know before they run out. But they're going to run out soon, and at that point, you know, I probably won't get any more. I don't think they're going to sell me any more at my discount. They're going to want to sell them for full price, with whatever they have left. I doubt I'll get more, but you know, if you wait, you could get one from them. I would hope until it runs out, and then what happens then, I don't know. I tried to get them to sell me the electronic rights, either to publish it electronically or give me the electronic rights and let me buy the electronic rights, and I'll publish it electronically. But so far, they haven't agreed to that. So that's where we're at with the book. All right, that's the end of that slideshow. But don't go anywhere, because you don't get away so easily. We're going to look now at some Hebrew inscriptions of Moses' era. Okay, so I think what I need to do is X that. Yeah, I can try.
So we've got inscriptions from Joseph, and we've got inscriptions from Moses' time. Is there a body of stuff in between that yet to be looked at, deciphered?
In between their lifetimes.
Yeah, in between, in 400 years.
Yeah.
If you got it here and here,
Yeah.
there's got to be something here.
Very few. Very few. And 2 of them are in my book, and then 2 of them I speak about that are found in the land of Canaan and that fall into the period between those 2 lifetimes. And I discuss those. And yeah, but there aren't many. And I, in fact, there is a journal article that I wrote recently and published that's downloadable for free from my academia.edu webpage. It's one of the most recent ones I've published, if not the most recent. And it discusses a new inscription that was found just a couple of years ago, three years ago now, three plus years ago. And it's called, well, it wasn't given a name. I gave it a name. Whether I can do that or not, I don't know, but I did it. The Lachish Milkball Ostracum. And in that article, I discuss those other inscriptions that are from Canaan that are alphabetic inscriptions, and that I'm convinced were written by Hebrews. And while the Hebrews were still living in Egypt, and there are only 2, and I discussed those. So if you want to read anything about that, you can consult that article. Good question. All right, now I'm going to try to see if I can run the slideshow from the beginning. Yes! I can actually do this myself now. See?
Nice.
Self-taught. Yeah, not bad for a non-technology guy. My son is the programmer in the family. All right, inscriptions from Joseph's era. So we're going to look at some of these inscriptions at some point. Maybe I'll stop, for the break, and I'll either finish it after the break, or we'll move right into the Moses' era. I'm not sure. But Sinai 115 we already talked about. Sinai 100. That is a Middle Egyptian inscription. No, that's the oldest Hebrew inscription. No, that's it. Sinai 377. This is the Middle Egyptian inscription right next to Sinai 377. Remember I showed you they were side by side? And I said one is a stelliform, and it's got the date up in the lunette in the top. Then 1834 is the next oldest purely Hebrew inscription after Sinai 377. And it is called Wadi Ohol 1. And then, so we're going to look at one of those Wadi Ohol inscriptions, I think, if not both. And then 1831 is the Lahun bilingual Ostracon that I referred to before. And then Sinai 376, that's the inscription. This is after Joseph's lifetime, 1772 BC. He dies in 1805, 1804 BC. There's one. And that's the one that mentions Joseph's wife. But it mentions her wife posthumously, not while she's alive. And that's important. All right, so first one we're going to look at together is the 2 Wadi Ohol inscriptions, 1 and 2. So Wadi Ohol is a site that was used as an Egyptian military outpost to protect the southern flank of Egypt from attack from Nubia. It's technically located right there right in the middle of a major bend, like a semicircle bend in the Nile River. And it's a perfect place for a military outpost because you can watch over much more territory of the river because of that circular nature of the Nile. So this outpost in Upper Egypt flourished during the Middle Kingdom, and inscriptions from pre-dynastic times to the early Islamic period have been found there. So it's a site where Egyptians have stopped and, used it as an outpost, used it to kind of check the traffic and make sure that the wrong people aren't getting into Egypt. Or it could be used just, it could have been that people just stumbled across it and looked at everything that was there and saw all these writings and decided, I'm going to write something myself. So there's a lot of what we would call graffiti that's there. But most of it is intentionally to be understood as writing that communicates something. And here's a blow-up of this, right? Wadi al-Hol is right here. There's the Nile River as it heads and takes this more or less circular bend, and then goes further up to the north. So since the Nile forms a bend here, that created this semicircle from the end of the 4th nome to the end of the 6th nome. With Wadi al-Hol almost at its center, the site sits in the perfect position to secure for the flow of traffic below with people visiting. And this is inscription number 1. There are 2 alphabetic inscriptions. You can already see the letters in this, can't you? So this is very easy to work with. That's a head. The head is the Hebrew word rosh. If you've heard that word rosh. So the Hebrew letter that's pronounced today, resh, has its origins in rosh, the head. You draw a head, you think rosh, and you pronounce ro. And then et cetera, et cetera. So I went through the process of filling in all of the right strokes. And of course, as you may be able to see, there are what we call false friends here. There are what looks like they could be inscribed lines that are not part of letters that you'd be confused into thinking they are. That's part of the demand of deciphering inscriptions on stone. You have those false friend strokes. And so you have to kind of eliminate them from your mind, and you stick with what's there. So I wrote in all of the letters. I pulled away the drawing, and that's what I'm left with. And now as an epigrapher, I can work to decipher this. Identify all the letters, and then identify where are the breaks in words, and then give a full translation. So, long story short, here's what it comes out to. And I love this because it's grammar. It's just rich with grammar. And a syntactical structure to Hebrew with a very specific, Hebrew grammatical tool that's not known to be used by any other Semitic language. It's just another marker to suggest to us it's got to be Hebrew. It's called a mean comparative, not M-E-A-N, but M-I-N, a mean comparative. What does that mean? Well, we have an adjective here, a comparative adjective, and then we have what I would call a superior noun here that's mentioned as the first noun. Then we have a preposition right here, which is mean, M-I-N, mean. And then we have an article, a noun, this is an abbreviated form of mean. It's known as a defective form of the preposition mean. So the M sound goes away, and all you need is the N, it absorbs it. And so this is another mean, it absorbs the nu, the N sound. The M absorbs the N sound. So that's mean, that's the preposition, and that's an article, and that's another noun, and that's a defective form of the mean preposition, and that's another noun. So here's what we have. We have a comparative adjective, superior noun, preposition, inferior noun, preposition, inferior noun, preposition, inferior noun. That is a perfect Hebrew construction. The first word, the adjective, is abundant or many. Many or much. But comparatively, it could be translated something like more. So the superior noun, you have more, right? You have more of this than something else. Now the normal, I'm getting really technical here, but I'm getting excited about this. The normal translation of the preposition mean is from as in out of. But when you have this kind of construction, it completely changes the meaning. And it changes the meaning to than. More this than that. More, longer than that. Higher than that. So the mean is always in the structure. It's changed, it has its meaning changed to than. So more, so wine is more abundant, right? Not just any more, but more abundant. It's so you can find more wine than some other element or elements. What elements? You can find more wine than the daylight or dawn, than the baker, than the free man. This is a really hard inscription, probably one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult inscription to interpret. What does it mean? And I think the only way to interpret it and understand it is in light of its historical context. Remember, when all the slaves were created in Egypt by the fact that they had to sell themselves to the king, now it's harder to find food in Egypt, isn't it? Right? It's harder to find food. Why? Because food comes from the grain that you grow to make bread. So it's easier to find wine at this time than to find a baker who's baking bread. Does that make sense? At the time of famine. It's really hard to find bread. Now, the daylight part, that's really difficult, and I'm not even sure on that. I give a couple possibilities in the book, but I'm not 100%. And look at this. Wine is more abundant than freemen. Wine is more abundant than freemen. Freemen as opposed to slaves. Does that not make sense contextually? That makes perfect sense to me. Isn't that crazy? What a culture. It's easier to find a glass of wine than to find a free man. That's powerful. Does that not support what Joseph saw God do in his midst? Taking away the freedom of all of the Egyptian people? For sure in my book. So that's Wadi Ohol 1. And I'm going to skip that part. We're going to go to Wadi Ohol 2. This is the drawing. It's meant to be vertical, but you see it as diagonal. But think vertically here, okay? Think vertically. This looks like what? If you're from the north like here, you can figure this out. You do this after the first snow. You make a snow angel, that's what it looks like. But it's not a snow angel. It's a Hebrew hieroglyph. It's called the Ankh glyph. Does anyone know what the Ankh glyph means? Some people wear it as a necklace. It means something. Ankh.
Rebirth.
Close.
Phoenix.
Close. Life. Life. It means life. Ankh means life. We have lots of depictions of iconography, Egyptian iconography, where one of the gods, the Egyptian god, is handing life to the king. And he's holding what? An Ankh sign. That's life. He's imparting life from his godness to that human being to keep him alive or to make him alive. All right, so that's that. Here's the inscription. And there it is as I draw it in. And there's one word here that scholars before me got that they translated, and they translated it right. And it's always helpful to me when I don't have to argue everything. And so they were right. This last word here, that this is one of those rare cases, folks, where there's a separation between everything that comes before and this word. Isn't that neat? Yeah. Separation. That's very abnormal for you Son of Frankenstein lovers. And that last word, this is, you remember that? What's that a drawing of? Yeah, the ox's head, exactly. And this is a shepherd's crook, or a staff, shepherd's staff. Shepherd's staff, in the ancient Hebrew world, it's known for several things, mainly for discipline. You discipline a child with a staff. You discipline a sheep with a staff. You prod it, you keep it out of the rocks or the crannies or the gorge that it could fall down into. So that being the case, the Hebrews used a connection here between the verb, which in Hebrew is different than in English. In English, to learn means one thing, to teach means something else, right? They're completely different. But in the Hebrew mind, they're not completely different. It's one and two sides of the same coin. To teach, from my perspective, is to learn from your perspective. So, lamad can mean teach or learn. So that's what that letter is, makes the L sound. So there's a vowel that goes under here that you can't see, that's a long A. It's an E-class vowel, long A. So it is ale. Ale. Ale is a word that Moses uses. Anybody know what he uses it of? Ale. God. And if you remember in our study of the religion of the Canaanite land and the Levant, El was the king of the gods in the 2nd millennium BC. Right? That I told you. Moses used that name of God in the Pentateuch. Whether you or I like it, he used it. And here it is in a Hebrew inscription, folks. Right there. That's God. Before the covenant name of God was ever in existence on earth. Because it was when it originated? We talked about this. When did God's covenant name, Yahweh, he who is, the one who goes on existing, when does it show up? Moses, Exodus 3. 1447 or so BC, right in that area. And this is 1834 BC. Way before the covenant name's ever given. And they use the name the Canaanites used for the king of the gods. For God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So what does the rest of it mean? Okay, long story short, here it is. Surrounding the crooked one, your afflictor, ... implied predication, is God. Hebrew has two ways of emphasizing. Two positions. There's the initial position to emphasize, and there's the final position to emphasize. You can put the word first that you want to emphasize, or you can put it last to emphasize it. This is one of those cases where it's put last. You hold off with the listener or the reader until the end. They're waiting. What is it? What is it? What is it that I can use here that's, to help me understand that it's, who or what it is surrounding the crooked one, your afflictor? It's God. So how does this work? What is the meaning of this? Let's say Roland and I are friends. We're fellow Hebrews in the ancient world. And he owns a ceramic business where he makes and sells pottery. And I think he could do it, to be honest, and make a fine living at it with his skill. And he has this business, but he has this constant problem. People keep breaking into his warehouse and stealing his inventory. And he becomes less and less able to support his family because of the loss of his business. So he comes to me, and he just pours out his heart. He says, Doug, I can't believe they broke in again, and they took 3/4 of my ceramic pots. And I have so little now that's left that I can sell. So what do? I put my arm around him, and I say, Roland, brother, let me comfort you with this. That person who stole from you, that crooked person, surrounding that crooked person who's afflicting you is God. And you know what he's like? God is like a boa constrictor. Isn't that cool? Boa constrictor doesn't kill with venom. He doesn't kill with a strike. He slowly wraps himself around the prey and goes tighter and tighter and tighter. And the prey dies, not because of being squeezed so tightly, but because the prey can't inhale anymore. There's no more space to inhale, and so it dies from asphyxiation. Isn't that terrible, to die like that? That's how a boa constrictor works. So God is going to work like that on the guy who's afflicting you. He's going to wrap himself around you like a boa constrictor. Squeeze, 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 squeeze. And he will, on your behalf, take care of that God. In his time, in his way, and to his extent, but he will always watch over you and protect you. You know what this is? this is the oldest Hebrew proverb in the world. Isn't that cool? It's a Hebrew proverb. It's not in the list of Solomon's and all those proverbs, but it's a Hebrew proverb. It may not be biblical, but it's true. That's what God will do with the person who afflicts you. You never have to worry. Right? With me. With all the people who afflict me because of these books I've published. Doesn't matter. They can kill me if they want. I don't care. I'm going to graduate if they kill me. So, take me out. Oppose me. Yell at me. Call me names. Go for it. But God surrounds you and squeezes you who afflict me, and He will do His work of judgment on you to glorify His name and to bring about vengeance. God said, "Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I will repay."
Yes.
I don't have to repay a thing. God can repay it.
Yeah.
Okay? So, isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
That is Wadiyaho 2. Who stole our time? Gee, Christmas. Are we ready for a break? Is that what time we've hit? Keep going? Yeah, I like that. So we're supposed to go to 3:48 to 4 o'clock. Okay, let me do one more. We'll take a break, and then we'll jump into the New Kingdom inscriptions.
Real quick.
Yep.
Why is there just randomly the there?
Oh, I forgot to explain it. Sorry. Yeah, that's really important because, as I told you before, in Egyptian inscriptions and all of the Hebrew inscriptions, they follow the same model, which is if there's a drawing and a text near it, the drawing and the text relate. So how do they relate? I suggest to you, kind of like that analogy I gave with the boa constrictor, that this represents the life of a person, not God, not the righteous Israelite, but the person stealing his inventory. That's the life of the evil person. And the text, notice this, texts are always, straight, either vertically or horizontally. This text bends. I understand it doesn't bend 360 degrees. Forget about that. It bends. The text bends around that Ankh sign. And by the time you get here, there's no more letters needed, so you have to stop. So he couldn't keep bending around. But it's the text bending around the life of a person. What person? The crooked one. That's what it is.
Wow.
Isn't that awesome? Yep.
It reminds me of Psalm 34, where it's the angel Yahweh encamps around those who fear Him.
Yep.
He delivers them. It's
Yep.
the positive aspect of
Sure.
God.
And here's similar to that. Habakkuk 1:4. Therefore the law is growing numb, and justice is not brought forth lastingly, because the wicked surround the righteous. And guess what? You see that word there, maktir? Guess where that is? Maktir. M-k-t-r. And here it is. M-k-t-r. Same word. Exactly the same word. You see the connection?
Yeah.
All right. One more inscription. So, the Lahun bilingual ostracon. I love this ostracon. So, in 1921, Petrie published this photograph, this image, published this drawing of this inscription that I call the Lahun bilingual ostracon. He said, the Lahun ostracon, quote, is dated to the 12th dynasty by being from the same town, Lahun, and on a jar certainly of that age. So, based on the pottery on which it's, because this is a piece of pottery, which makes it an ostracon. If you have a broken part of a pot, it's a potsherd. If a person in antiquity writes on it, it's an ostracon. Okay? So this is an ostracon. It's pottery. And it's a broken vessel, and a part of it was used as a writing surface. So Petrie published this in 1921. This is all he published. And he said, yeah, it definitely dates to the 12th dynasty. Some scholars try to tell us, no, it dates to Moses' lifetime, the 18th dynasty, the 15th century BC. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Study Petrie. He's a great archaeologist. Come on. Give me a break. Work harder at this. So I ended up going to where this was, the inscription was. I was taking a trip to the UK, so I decided I'll go see it for myself. And I went to the Petrie Museum, it's a fitting place for it, and I saw it for myself. So, and I arranged ahead of time for this, and the curator, she was new on the job for only some amount of months, and I told her I was here to see the Ostrakhan. So you know what she did? She came back a few minutes later. She went into her area where things are kept, and she found what she wanted to show me, and she came back. And you know what she showed me? She came back with this. Okay, that's all she came back with. And I thought, this is great and terrible at the same time. It's great because we have what's called a rim sherd. That's part of the rim. If we have part of the rim, we know exactly what kind of pottery it is, and we can date it specifically to a certain time frame. So that's just jump up and down moment. But a lot of the inscription is gone. It's not there anymore. And all she showed me is this. And I said to her, I said, Curator Stevenson, there's a big fat problem here. Maybe I didn't use that term, but I said, look, when Petrie published this, he showed us that there's this piece and there's this piece. Where are they? Oh, I wish you could have seen the look on her face. She was mortified. Immediately, she said, I've got to leave and I'll be back in a minute or two. So she ran back into the inventory. 10 minutes later, she comes back. Smile on her face. She has this piece and this piece. And she says, wow, I'm sure glad you came, because now I realize we had this wrong. We need to put the pieces together. So after I left, she adhered these two pieces to the original part. Somehow they got disconnected. But again, the good news is she showed me what I didn't know, which is the rim sherd is here. So what I did is I hired an Egyptian ceramicist who specializes in the Middle Kingdom to study this rim sherd and this portion of the pottery. So, and she lived in London, or UK, in the London area, so she easily could go to the Petrie Museum at her own leisure and get access to it and then study it. And she said, yeah, no doubt about it, this dates to the reign of Sesostris II, based on the parallels. Who is the abundance pharaoh, right? So all the people saying all these alphabetic inscriptions, they don't date to any earlier than the 15th century BC, than Moses' lifetime in Dynasty 18. There aren't any inscriptions that really date back to the Middle Kingdom, to the 12th dynasty. Oh, really? Now we have ceramic evidence, my friend, that makes it an irrefutable argument that the inscriptions go all the way back to the 12th dynasty. And so Petrie is justified by claiming that it has to be of Dynasty 12. So I'll skip all of that and get to the meaning. This is written in Middle Egyptian. This is Middle Egyptian. This is Hebrew. This is Hebrew, which is really weird. It's a form, it's not a typical bilingual, but it's a form of bilingual, meaning it has two languages. But it's kind of like a Hispanic woman talking to her mom on the phone. She goes from Spanish to English to Spanish to English to Spanish to English, right? That's what they did here. In Middle Egyptian, this gives a renal date. This is a renal dating formula. So renal year 29, month 1, and then this is summer. This is Shemu for summer. And then here's the Hebrew inscription. And it does something, this inscription does something that any other inscription does that I translated. It has what we call an ideogram. An example of an ideogram is right here. Ideogram is a Middle Egyptian concept, or an Egyptian language concept, where you have one hieroglyph to communicate an entire concept. That's only one way that a hieroglyph is used. There's 4 total ways. So when you write the Nesu, when you write this glyph, it represents an entire word and an entire concept. Nesu means king. So when you write that, it's king. That's a plant, by the way. The hieroglyph is a plant. So this is an ideogram, this is an ideogram, and this is an ideogram. It's one, in this case, proto-consonantal letter, Hebrew letter, that represents an entire word, and that entire word is house. Everywhere else it's written by every other Hebrew from every other place and every other tongue, it's not like that. You can't just write one letter, B, and think we're going to understand that's an entire house. You're going to write out the rest of the word. What does that tell me? This is very important. It tells me that this makes sense, first of all, if it's from Lahoun, where Joseph's family was, where they would have been fluent in Egyptian, and when their relatives in Avaris created the alphabet, and Joseph's family caught on to that, and they knew about it and used it, that they applied to it a concept in Middle Egyptian that is perfectly good Middle Egyptian, this ideogram concept. And we can do it if we want it, even though the Hebrews, who are relatives at Avaris, who invented the alphabet, didn't ever use it that way, or intended to be used that way. But because we're better at Middle Egyptian, we're going to use it anyway, that concept, the ideogram. So a feast is my celebration on account of the house, because this house is the house of the king. That's what the meaning is. So this goes back to what I suggested to you before, which is, remember I talked about those villas at Lahoun, and that they were probably, or at least one of them was owned by a Hebrew, because that's where Joseph's family is. Maybe all of them, I don't know, but at least one of them. Think about this. What is this probably signaling? The building, the construction of one of those villas. And now that it's completed, what are we going to do? Celebrate, man. It's party time. Now, if I'm a Hebrew and I own the house, what am I going to call the house? My house. This guy doesn't call it my house, does he? He calls it the king's house. Why does he call it the king's house? Because in this time, who owns everything in Egypt? The king. It's the king's house, but it's my party. Because I get to live in the house. Even though he owns it, I live in it. This supports biblical history. It can't be your house, Mr. Hebrew, because the king owns everything. He owns you, he owns the house, he owns everything. So this suggests to us a correlation with what we read about in the biblical text, and that is the Lahoun bilingual Astrakhan. Let's take a break and come back in 3:59. Let's come back and start right at 10 after